The Strand is one of London's most historic streets, and in this part of the world, history goes back a long way. There's been a street here since Roman times. In the Middle Ages, it was known as the Street of Palaces. It's attracted protesters down through the ages, from the Peasants' Revolt to modern-day riots. It's always been a street which offers the most expensive and sophisticated luxuries, and yet has the greatest number of street people in London. At one end, you'll find the highest court in the land, while below ground, there's a ghost on the platform. It's where a king found his mistress and where Sherlock Holmes came to catch a train. If you know where to look, history comes alive on the Strand. The Strand runs through the very heart of London, from the Royal Courts of Justice in the east to Trafalgar Square in the west. One of London's busiest and most popular spaces, Trafalgar Square commemorates the English naval victory over the French at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. At the top of the 172-foot column stands Admiral Lord Nelson, the national hero who foiled Napoleon's plans to invade England. When the column was finished, the stonemasons held a celebration dinner at the very top. Nowadays, Nelson's dinner guests are more likely to be the square's pigeons, and there are thousands. The mayor of London wants to ban pigeon feeding and save the $150,000 a year it costs to clean up after them. But the pigeons keep away when the British come to Trafalgar Square to protest, whether peacefully or violently. It's also a place of celebration. It was here that Nelson Mandela spoke to the crowds as the newly elected president of South Africa. And every New Year's Eve, whatever the weather, crowds gather in Trafalgar Square to see in the new year. The word Strand in Old English means beach, and it reminds us that originally the Strand was a quiet track running beside the River Thames. Later it became an important link between the City of London and Westminster. Today, the Strand has become one of London's major thoroughfares. By day, there are crowds of people rushing to and from work, as well as those who are drawn to its shops and high-class restaurants. At night, it becomes a place of entertainment. It's the venue for many of London's most famous theaters. One of London's busiest stations stands on the Strand, and it's named after the Charing Cross. The original of this ornate cross was erected by King Edward I over 700 years ago, in memory of his beloved wife Eleanor. Wherever you go in Britain, distances to and from London have always been measured from the Charing Cross. The station handles 400 trains a day and more than 58 million passenger journeys a year. It was the station from which Phileas Fogg left England in Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. And it's also where Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's famous detective Sherlock Holmes, with his faithful companion Dr. Watson, set off on some of their most exciting cases. If you want to follow in Holmes' footsteps, a good place to start is this pub behind Charing Cross Station. It's dedicated to the memory of England's most famous detective, and features a recreation of Holmes' study at 221B Baker Street. The connections between the imaginary world of Sherlock Holmes and the real geography of London are revealed by local expert Sue Jackson.
Where we are now is land that belonged originally to the ancestors of Conan Doyle, the writer of the Sherlock Holmes stories. Conan Doyle really evokes the atmosphere, the fogs, the gaslit alleyways, and those alleyways are still there to this day. Walking along them, you can feel you're back at that time.
A few steps away, down another of the Strand's gaslit alleys, you can have a drink at another pub with historical associations. The Nell Gwyn is named after one of England's best-known mistresses. Nell Gwyn was born in a brothel in nearby Covent Garden. She went from selling oranges to acting at the Theatre Royal, which was built in 1669 by royal command of King Charles II, a man who rather enjoyed a good night out. It was at the Theatre Royal that he fell in love with the beautiful, high-spirited Nell Gwyn, and she became one of his many mistresses. The King's special interest in the theatre has meant that the Strand and its surrounding streets today house many of London's best-known theatres. With such a long history, it would be surprising if there weren't a few ghosts lurking behind the scenes. The Adelphi Theatre, home to a long-running production of the musical Chicago, has one of its very own, as theatre manager Tommy Baxter explains.
This is the Adelphi Theatre, and our famous ghost is the actor William Terrace, a very well-known late Victorian actor who'd appeared here for many, many seasons and was stabbed by a fellow actor, Prince, at the stage door of the theatre. And this is where it all happened, right here at William Terrace's private entrance at the Adelphi Theatre. He put his key in the lock, turned to open, and Prince ran from the other side of the street and stabbed him in the back, twice. There's definitely something here, definitely. And it doesn't just happen at night. You can be wandering through here during the day and you get this feeling that you're not alone.
South of the busy Strand, there are several quieter streets sloping down to the river. The names remind us that in medieval times, the Strand was a street of palaces. Bishops and nobles built large residences with gardens stretching down to the River Thames, which was much closer to the street than today. And York Palace Watergate marks the original bank of the Thames. It was from river gates like these that the noble classes took ferries to the city or Westminster. There are other traces of the old street of palaces. London's famous Savoy Hotel occupies the site of the 13th century palace built for Count Peter of Savoy. The palace was looted and set on fire by 14th century tax protesters during the Peasants' Revolt. Some of the rebels got carried away while ransacking the wine cellars. They drank so much that when the burning walls started to collapse, they were too drunk to escape and were trapped in the wreckage, where they were left to die a horrible death. The hotel that stands on the site of this calamity today was built by the theatrical impresario Richard D'Oyly Carte. He first built the Savoy Theatre, where he staged Gilbert and Sullivan's hugely popular operas, which made him a wealthy man. The Savoy Theatre was the first public building in London to be lit by electricity. D'Oyly Carte used his profits from the theatre to build one of the world's most famous hotels.
Well, I have your keys. Let me show you along up the room. The northern service.
The Savoy was the first to introduce some of the little luxuries we now take for granted, like room service and ensuite bathrooms. Many of the world's movers and shakers have checked in to the Savoy, and most wind up in the American bar where head barman Peter Dorelli has mixed a mean cocktail for the best of them.
It's called the American bar because it was the first American bar of the kind. Harvey Crossland was the head barman in those days in the States. He lost his job through Prohibition. So he came over here and opened this bar in 1926 and was the head barman for 28 years. Well, let's start with the Cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan is the drink of the year. Cranberry juice, the most famous of which I really enjoyed it, even if it was a hard work, was Frank Sinatra. We put a little vodka. That man never slept. I don't know why, but you know, it kept us busy until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And then we give him a shake. Liza Minnelli, Sammy Davis Jr. We had to stop Sammy Davis tap dancing on top of the piano. The piano was slightly damaged, sadly to say, but it was great. There you are. And there's the Cosmopolitan.
The list of celebrities who have stayed at the Savoy is a long one. Its riverside restaurant has one of the finest views in London. French impressionist Claude Monet painted some of his most celebrated canvases while staying at his favorite suite on the 5th floor. The food, of course, is superb and carefully prepared by the 80 or so staff supervised by head chef Anton Edelman.
When you think that on average day we buy about £15,000 worth of food, we buy something like 2,000 kilos of goose liver a year. We buy, I think, 1 million of eggs. I think caviar comes to 200 kilo a year, which is a mountain of beluga caviar when you think about it.
But some of the regular inhabitants of the Strand will settle for a lot less than a kilo of caviar. The area attracts more homeless people than any other in London, and their culinary delights come from the Salvation Army's soup kitchen. Further east along the Strand, on the other side of Waterloo Bridge, is Somerset House, splendidly rebuilt in the late 18th century on the site of one of the original Strand palaces. For many years, this magnificent building was the famous home of Britain's Register of Births and Deaths. Today, it houses tax inspectors and other government offices. Recently, the dramatic courtyard of Somerset House has been turned into one of London's newest and most elegant open-air venues, with, in the winter months, a hugely popular outdoor ice rink. Overlooking the river from the terrace at Somerset House, you get one of the finest views in London. Across from Somerset House, the marvelous Baroque Church of St. Mary le Strand has stood on an island in the busy street since the early 1700s. It was built without windows on the first floor to reduce the clatter of horse-drawn traffic from the street, a design feature which makes even more sense today. Beneath the traffic flowing round St. Mary le Strand lies the secret world of one of London's lost underground stations. Strand Station closed in 1994, but it's a station with a tale to tell, as station supervisor Barry Wilkinson knows.
The most famous story here is that the station was actually built on the site of a theatre. It's rumoured that the station is inhabited by a ghost of the leading lady actress at the time, who apparently objected to the theatre being demolished to make way for the station. I haven't experienced the presence, but I understand some of our people have. Despite
the ghost, film companies still regularly carry their equipment down the 121 steps to use the old platforms as an atmospheric location. The video game Tomb Raider features an adventure set in the gloomy tunnels of the deserted station. At the eastern end of the Strand, you'll find the Royal Courts of Justice. This spectacular 19th century building is home to the highest civil courts in the land. The Strand is well known for its theatres, and some say the law is just theatre on a different stage. In British courts, what adds to the sense of theatre is that lawyers have to wear 18th century wigs. An expert in the history of the profession is barrister Andrew Goodman.
Wigs were made from human hair. Every day, your servant or your clerk would have to sort out your wig by recurling the curls. And that is very much the wig as we still wear it today. Well, we're now in Barristers Chambers at the far eastern end of that area known as the Temple, which is itself at the far eastern end of the Strand. And this is a small area, about a quarter of a mile by half a mile, which has been occupied by lawyers since the turn of the 14th century. So we've been here for about 700 years.
Just across from the medieval temple, the Royal Courts of Justice opened for business a mere 120 years ago. Inside, there are nearly 100 courts and 3.5 miles of corridors. This is where the Court of Appeal gives final judgment on the big legal issues of the day. It's where celebrities like Elton John and the Spice Girls come to defend their good name. And not surprisingly, cases here attract a lot of media attention.
It's the sort of place where you will find camera crews and journalists hanging around outside the front door every day of the week. You know, you go in there and you feel rather special working in a place like that.
Where Waterloo Bridge meets the Strand, at number 1 the Aldwych, there's another elegant building, which in a different era echoed to the bustle of newspaper journalism, as the offices of the Morning Post. Today, it's an exclusive and very stylish hotel.
Good morning. Can I help you?
Its owner is Gordon Campbell-Gray.
The building's highly ornate on the outside, but mercifully, because it was for a newspaper, they didn't do much with the inside. Thus, I was able to completely gut the internal part of the building and create what we have now. Of course, the most important thing was to put a good art collection in. We have over 380 pieces of sculpture and paintings. Every piece had to be good enough to hang in my own house.
The fancy design concept is everywhere, and they've managed to outdo even the nearby Savoy by putting a television in every bathroom.
My feeling was that in the past, five-star hotels really were snobby environments, and they were not welcoming to all people. And I wanted it to be really a snob-free zone.
Although the lobby is open to all, a deluxe suite at 1 Aldwych would cost you $1,500 a night. Coffee and tea drinking are a long-standing tradition on the Strand, and the place to buy your tea and coffee is Twinings, established nearly 300 years ago by Thomas Twining. And it's still in the family. Stephen Twining is the current owner.
Here we are at 216 The Strand, opposite the Royal Courts of Justice, and the family has been here for 10 generations now, and in fact we hold a unique record. We are the same family in the same line of business in the same location. We started as a coffee house, and due to the stiff competition from the 2,499 other coffee houses around, Thomas started selling fine quality teas.
Twinings now sells 3 billion tea bags a year to 105 export markets around the world. They import from anywhere quality tea is grown: India, Sri Lanka, China, Indonesia, and increasingly from Africa. The Strand has always been a truly international street. And between Trafalgar Square and the Aldwych, you can find embassies representing most of the countries that made up the old British Empire. Today, many British citizens have strong family links with the same countries, now part of the Commonwealth. And the stamps of the whole world can be found at Stanley Gibbons at number 399. Stanley Gibbons himself was born in 1840, the year the world's first adhesive stamps, the penny black and the tuppenny blue, were produced. He was a stamp enthusiast from an early age and founded the company when he was just 16 years old. Today, the shop he opened on the Strand in 1893 is the mecca for stamp collectors from around the world, and it produces over 25 catalogs a year, listing literally millions of stamps. Directly across the street from Stanley Gibbons, you'll find Simpson's in the Strand, a 160-year-old restaurant with its origins in the gentlemen's coffee houses of the 18th century and the chess clubs of the 19th. Now it's famous for serving the finest roast beef of the British Isles in the most sumptuous surroundings. Simpson's organizes special carving lessons for its customers, led by head carver David Evely.
When we come to carving, you should always choose a knife which is longer than the joint you're going to carve. Go at about 10 degrees from the top and looking at our destination where we're going to end up. Like driving a car, you're going to be looking 20 feet ahead of you, not looking at the wheel, otherwise we'd have a crash. So very slowly, just like playing a violin, let the knife do the work, bringing it all the way down to the base. Let it fall away, quite around this one.
It's a long-standing tradition to wheel the roast to the table on silver dinner trolleys and to carve it in front of the guests. For those who like their meat red, it's a mouth-watering experience.
You get the true grass flavors coming through when it's cut thin like that.
Delicious.
Spend 24 hours on the Strand and you'll see how history can shape a city. How a great naval battle can lead to a square full of pigeons. How you'll find a sumptuous hotel where peasants burn down a palace. And how a dozen theaters now thrive where a king once took a mistress. The Strand is steeped in history, and there's no better place to see where the past meets the present.